This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornital, coming to you once again from the little house on the east side of Saratoga Springs, joined today by my regular co-host. He's a traveling man. He's the people's champion. He may have a new title. I'll get to that a little bit later in the show. But you know him, you love him. He's Jonathan Kinch and JK. What's up, my man?
Oh, man, what's going on? I'm finally back in Austin for about 3 or 4 more days, and then I'm back to Del Mar. I can't get enough of these summer meets. We'll see. It should slow down after that.
Well, it's been an incredible summer of travel for you. At least your travel this time around not as bad as before. We're going to talk about some of the details of your most recent trip to Saratoga as we get a little bit later in the show, but we're not going to bury the lead this time. We're going to dive right in and talk about the Travers Stakes, which saw West Coast in more or less of a tour de force performance, capturing the race wire to wire under an aggressive ride, a 108 Beyer speed figure for West Coast. What did you think of this performance overall, Jonathan?
I thought it was pretty impressive. I was kind of against the horse a little bit. I used the horse. Obviously, we had a good day, but a little bit against the horse, just based on the fact that I thought he kind of traveled on the good part of the track in his last 2 races, and I thought that he would be a little bit overbet with the Bob Baffert factor. But at the same time, I respected our friend Nick Tamero's opinion that he was going to run well, and I respected Baffert a little bit and wasn't going to get caught in that situation again. So used the horse in a more of a defensive way. I was more of a Tappert and E-Rap type of guy, but I thought he ran well. I don't think he's anointed himself a 3-year-old champion or the greatest Travers winner of all time like we saw last year. But nonetheless, a nice horse who ran the fastest figure of any 3-year-old, I think, this year.
Yeah, and as impressive as he was on the Beyer scale, how about this on time form, 132, which translates to, a few points higher than the 108 Beyer. So it was super impressive on the clock and on the ratings method. Let me ask you this about West Coast. You were a little lukewarm. I was a little lukewarm. Had you known Mike Smith was going to send, what would that have done to your opinion of the horse going into the race?
Oh, it would have made a difference. And in hindsight, I feel a little silly for not assuming that was the case. When you looked at the PPs, there was, I think there was probably 3 horses that could be on the lead, and he happened to have been one of them. And the other one, in my opinion, was never going to run well. Always dreaming. So, yeah, hindsight, yeah, you would have predicted that that's where Mike and Bob would have put the horse, because that's often where Mike and Bob put horses.
You mentioned that you are not ready to anoint him the 3-year-old champion just yet, and of course, that's only sensible. This is the Grade 1 win, after all. But forget about what would happen. I mean, we could talk about what would happen with the vote if the voting were today, but that's kind of the kind of academic argument that's good for podcasts, but isn't going to make anybody any money. So let's look at the question from a slightly different angle, and let me ask you, what's going to happen? What's going to happen from here? And based on what you think is going to happen from here with the 3-year-olds, who's going to end up the 3-year-old champ?
I would say that if any of the following horses, Always Dreaming, Cloud Computing, Tappert, or West Coast happen to win, and maybe even Gervin happen to win the Awesome Again out in California, the Pennsylvania Derby, the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and or the Breeders' Cup Classic, that could be enough to cement them. But as of right now, I think I might vote for Oscar Performance.
Right. Oscar performance, I agree, would be what I would do now based on the way, and again, this is academic, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But, having voted for these awards, it says 3-year-old. It doesn't say 3-year-old dirt. So if you're voting today, that's Oscar performance to me is like kind of the only answer. However, you mentioned a couple of horses in there, JK, and that rundown you just gave, that I'd be shocked if any of them, not any of them, I'd be shocked if several of them won a grade one from here. Cloud Computing and Always Dreaming, who seemed like maybe they were just the best at the right time and haven't really trained on since the spring. West Coast, to me, is the one who seems like he could capture a race like the Pennsylvania Derby, run well in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic, and he might be. If you made me pick one right now, if you made me say who's the favorite to actually win the award, not like if it started today, West Coast, I think, is the one that I'd be willing to follow. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I could agree with that. I mean, he is probably the most progressive of the ones that we're discussing. I mean, the rest of them seem to be going the wrong direction. And when I say the rest of them, I mean Always Dreaming clearly is going the wrong direction. Cloud Computing, back-to-back, no excuses. Gervin seems to be having some clerical issues going on, and he didn't run well at all either. So, I mean, I don't really, none of them get me that excited, West Coast included. But of all of those I've named, West Coast gets me more excited than the others.
Clerical issues. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll just let that lie unless you can. I'm not sure that's something you can expound upon at the moment. But as a host, I felt like I couldn't let the comment go without.
No, without any details, I'll just say that there's rumors I've heard about things that are going on with the Haskell. I don't know if it's true or not. I haven't read it in print. Just heard it. His performance wasn't very good in the Travers. We'll just look for stories on DRF to see what something comes up, if something comes up at all. But I just racetrack goings on where you hear about issues and guess we'll find out when more information comes out.
Stay tuned to DRF.com, of course, for all the latest news and stories from the sport of thoroughbred racing. We got to talk about Gunnevera, my friend. Wow, where did that race come from?
I have absolutely no idea, because that was phenomenal. And I know we'll talk about it a little bit later. I'm not sure yet. And he's actually one of the reasons why I'm not sure if the inside was where you want it to be. But if it was, well, he ran amazing. And even if it wasn't, he middle moved as a 20-1 shot, as what we would call a third or fourth tier 3-year-old. I think we all thought that horse was. He middle moved into that situation and sustained that bid and kept running and ran at the leader late. I thought he was really, really good.
Keep in mind, this is a race where Timeform had the mark to the mile coded as blue as well, making it even harder, you'd think, for a wide early move like the one made by Gunnevera to get there. I think we should talk about the track before we talk about the other races. I'll just start with the simplest question. If you were to assign a track bias designation for the Travers Day Dirt, what would you go with?
I would think it was on the fairer side. And I know we're going to probably, I know we wanted to talk about this before we talk about the other races, but I'll probably, ruin some of the.
No, we can loop in the other. We can talk about everything as of a piece as we. It's hard to separate these two topics because fair makes sense as an answer to that question, because I think two of the most memorable runs on the day were wide runs. And you think to yourself, track bias is one of these things. It's so complicated, and once in a while, it's once in a blue moon, it's simple. Much more often, it's very complicated and hard to parse what's really going on, because you see cross currents and because there's circumstances in racing that lead to certain results that might provoke a knee-jerk reaction of bias, but they're really, again, just circumstantial. But the two runs, to me, in real time, at the end of the day, I said I thought the track was fair because it didn't seem possible that Forever Unbridled could make the run that she ran on a track that was playing inside, and it didn't seem possible that Gunnevera could have run that well on a track that was playing to the inside. However, there are other interesting data points to suggest that the inside was really good. A lot of horses, including Songbird, who ran figures better than the figure they ran in their previous start, who were racing along the inside, and a lot of horses racing along the outside, whose figures were lower than they were in the previous starts. And I know that's something Paul Matisse, with whom I had the pleasure of speaking yesterday at the end of the day over in Matisse Village out by the Big Red Spring. That was an observation that he made to me that I thought was worth passing along. Are you buying this at all?
No, I'm just going to start naming off horses as the reasons that I'm not 100% convinced.
Do it.
All right. Forever Unbridled, big run outside. Songbird, poor run inside. By the Moon, obviously you can't come to a decision there. She went 24 to the half.
Yeah, circumstances.
Karina Mia was closing on the outside with an outside trip, and she was probably the third or fourth horse in that race that I think people were probably leaning on. So she ran well on the outside. Dre Fong walked on the lead.
Yep, circumstantial.
Practical Joke was going to win the race if they ran it on glass. You know, and he got a perfect trip inside. I don't care if the rail was, well, I guess if the rail was dead, he would have been in trouble. But I mean, he had everything his way in that spot with a pace to run at the whole nine. Gunnevera, obviously, the run he made wide. I just don't think I'll be signing on to the rail was gold. It might have, but the rail's always kind of where you want to be anyway. So,
right. I mean, you have a natural advantage. The speed is, speed is the universal track bias of dirt racing, right?
And the other thing is that, I know Paul had mentioned that Dre Fong and West Coast both ran huge numbers, and so that was part of the reason he was possibly thinking that the inside was good. But let's also keep in mind that Baffert, it happened actually on Belmont Day. We thought the outside was a little bit good. Maybe it's just that Baffert's bringing his West Coast horses to this East Coast racing, and he's running their lifetime figs and just making you think there's a bias. I mean, Dre Fong had every reason to run a huge number. West Coast had every reason to run a big number, running first time at 1.25 miles. And so
laid out for the race, yeah.
I just think it's a lot of circumstance there and a lot of reasons that point that there's not a situation. And I think anytime you can put doubt or strike doubt into bias, I think you're better off leaning in that direction. At least that's what Duke and Paul always taught me in the conversations we've had, is if you don't know, then don't say it is. Don't
Err
guess.
On the side of caution.
Yeah, don't guess, because when you guess, you cost yourself and others a lot of money. Don't guess. Just say you don't know and wait till next time. It needs to be clear and definitive. And this one just doesn't feel like it's clear and definitive.
Yeah, I mean, my gut is telling me after looking at it, the inside was probably maybe worth a little. But yeah, I wouldn't call it a bias. I wouldn't be looking for Forever Unbridled and Gunnevera to be like the super horses of the century who overcame something next time. I think they ran well on a track that was maybe, again, just my gut, worth a little bit more than the geometry and the inherent bias of speed and horses getting to the inside. Now, an interesting data point, and here I will segue back into talking about the races. One might say, and I heard somebody sharp say this, if there was really a track bias, doesn't Songbird win by 5? And I mean, I get the logic of that statement, but you got to remember, this is a horse who just lost a grade 1 by a neck, whose owner was so concerned that they basically rushed her off to the clinic afterwards to make sure that nothing was wrong with her. Porter even saying not the same, the thing that many handicappers have been saying all year, not the same filly that we saw last year. It's also certainly interesting that Smith, who had that inside trip, he clearly well, I mean, this is just obvious, I guess, but it's very clear that he didn't think that the inside was bad at all in terms of what he did, the rides he gave the rest of the day. But that's just obvious. I would imagine some were thinking after Songbird doesn't win from there that the rail not only might not have been good, but might have been bad. But clearly, I think in the case of Songbird, we're dealing with a situation where she just hasn't really trained on / isn't really the same. What's your take? How good is this filly, and why, JK, do people feel so passionate on both sides of the issue about Songbird?
Well, I think they're passionate because of speed figures. Because at one point she was undefeated and she was exciting, and she did it on the front end, and she was beating horses easily, and she was a filly, and there's a lot of reasons to get excited and to cheer for her. Unfortunately, from a handicapper's perspective, she wasn't running fast numbers. There was a lot of doubt in her, and then she proved herself running against one of the greatest mares of all time in Beholder, and stretching her to the wire in that game finish at the Breeders' Cup Distaff. And then she comes back this year and kind of starts over the whole routine again of just not really doing what I think you expect her to do based on her accolades and what the public thinks of her and how she's bet. There's nothing wrong with winning as many races as she has. Like Craig Bernick said, he hopes to have a filly that one day that wins as many races as she does and people hate. So,
great line.
But the problem for me,
but why the hate? That's what I wanted. Like, explain the hate a little more, because I don't really get that piece of it. Like, I might see a horse who's puffed up and a cool horse, and I think to myself privately, I'm waiting for the right spot to bet against this horse. But I'm not going to go out there and I feel like this filly's gotten from a lot of sharp people some pretty negative comments.
Well, and I have friends that fall in this category, so if they're listening, they won't take offense because they know I would tell them to their face as well. I think a lot of times in racing, this is a sport that you have to have, if you're participating from a parimutuel standpoint, you have to have the confidence that you're the smartest guy in the room. You have to feel that way, otherwise you shouldn't be wagering your dollar. And I think what happens sometimes is that people get caught up in your opinion's bad and I'm smarter than you and it annoys me and I need to let you know that you're wrong. And I think that a lot of that hate comes from people's desire that we can't bet on Songbird every day, against Songbird every day. So every opportunity they get, they want to be able to express that she's not as good as the uneducated fans in terms of handicapping think that she is. They think she's a super filly who, as long as they put her in the gate, she's going to win. And that obviously is just not the case. And I think some people get caught up in that and wanting to kind of express that angle as often as possible. And that sometimes comes out on Twitter and whatever. I don't think it's so much hate. I don't think it's hate for the horse. I think it's annoyance for the people that are declaring her one of the best fillies of all time. And I think that aggravates some people that don't feel like she's as talented or as good as Rachel or, some of the other great fillies in the past that I was, still in kindergarten when they were running.
I'm so funny. I'm just different, like to me, I get excited if I hear people puffing up a horse that I'm excited to bet against, because I feel like money is going to be eventually flowing my way. And I'm not interested in sort of tapping on the aquarium glass to shake up the fish. I want them to be happy and bring their wagering dollars. So the money will come flowing back my way. It's the thing I've said 100 times on this show. Do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? And I pick rich pretty much every time. And with that in mind, did we miss an opportunity here, JK, to make money? I don't mean to be mean about Songbird. I think she's really cool, obviously. But did we miss an opportunity to make some money betting against her in this spot?
Absolutely. The music was playing. I tried to sit in a chair, and I missed it. I mean,
you've gone from a hot potato analogy to a musical chairs analogy. Explain, a lot of Tuesday listeners aren't Friday listeners and vice versa. So explain what you mean by that.
I felt strongly, and this is not a red board, because I didn't bet.
Go listen to Friday's show.
And in fact, I lost a significant amount of money when she got beat. So just because I bet Songbird. I'm saying that I knew she was going to lose this year. I was very confident about that. I just wanted it to be in a setting where I could get better than 2-1 on the horse that I was going to try to beat her with. And I also would have liked for it to be a much more favorable pace scenario in which I was going to try to beat her. If I was going to take that stand against her, I wanted it to be a scenario that I felt was a lot more likely than the one on Saturday. And I wanted a price on the horse I was going to beat her with that was better than 2-1. I envisioned beating her on Breeders' Cup Day when she went off the 8-5 favorite, and I got Forever Unbridled at 6-1, or I got Stellar Wind at 4-1, or I got Abel Tasman at 12-1. Like, that's what I wanted. I didn't want Forever Unbridled in a paceless race at 2-1.
Makes perfect sense to me. And in fact, 3.5 lengths up at the pace call, at that point in the race, you could double your bet on Songbird. I mean, you would have, and you would have felt, and you made an aggressive play against her, you would have said, oh boy, here we go. So, I mean, I think that you're very justified in saying that. Let's pause on Forever Unbridled for a second and give her some props, though. Very impressive race, given the unfavorable dynamics. And it sounds like she might have some ambitious plans ahead. How good do you think this filly is, and where do you think we'll see her next?
I think I heard Dallas say they gave her 10 weeks between the last race and this one. It's 11 weeks to the Breeders' Cup. I think they're going to just train her up.
Train her up and try and go right to the Distaff. Well, I mean, it certainly makes sense that she'd have to be viewed as a valid threat. How do you think she'll perform at Del Mar? Any opinion on how she'll like that track?
Yeah, her figure didn't come back that fast. I think I'm still going to probably fall in the Abel Tasman Stellar Wind category when it comes to, if I had to place my future wagers right now on that race. I think I would lean in those two categories. I love that Stellar Wind has become a little bit more tactical, but I think that when she gets a real race and a real pace to run at, she can come from off the pace. I think that'll fit her perfectly. A little concerning that Abel Tasman didn't come back for the Alabama, but she'll have another race for us to see if she's okay or not. Obviously, she doesn't run well in her next race, then the red flags can kind of go up there. But for me in that division, those are the two leaders for me: Stellar Wind and Abel Tasman.
Interesting you don't mention a late in that group who might have, was certainly very similar to Abel Tasman, I thought, 2 back, and looked to come on for that performance with what she did back in the Alabama. But you prefer Abel Tasman in any rematch between those two?
I do. It'll be a home game. It's Baffert out west. Obviously, that's a little bit advantageous. The East Coast dirt horses don't typically come over and move up on the West Coast. So, it's not that she can't. Obviously, Bill Mott brought Royal Delta over and won at Santa Anita in a very impressive distaff in her own right. I just think I like Elate. Please don't get me wrong. I think she's nice. I just think that we saw her best at 1.25 miles. And I think at 1.125 miles, it's not that it's not 6 furlongs to 10 furlongs, but I think there's a difference there, and I think that Elate's better at 1.25 miles. And when you're facing the type of horses she's going to be facing, I would imagine that little bit of a difference is going to make a difference. One
caution I'll just say, and it all depends on who shows up on the day of the race and all that good stuff, but a projected hot pace at 1.125 miles, I feel like that could bring Elate's many reserves of stamina into play in a way where I would not rule her out at all in a rematch. If it's going to be a slow-paced 1.125 miles, I think then they're not playing Elate's game. But I wouldn't rule her out if the situation is going to bring that stamina into play. And I think that's something to look at when you handicap whatever race Elate shows up next in. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I'm going to say it really slow because you do this for me sometimes. You ask me questions slow to get that. And I'm going to say the question, then I'll keep kind of vamping a little bit to give you some more time. Tell me 2 fillies or mares that you could expect to be on the front end in the distaff.
Yeah, well,
talking 3-year-olds. Think about the Alabama.
Yeah. No, I can't. I don't need the time because I can't. I'm just going to tell you right now.
I don't know any of them. Songbird, but she's not a runoff.
And who knows if she's even going to be there at this point? Her
Valdori and Stellar Wind raced the other day and they were crawling.
Yeah.
The Alabama for Abel Tasman, or I'm sorry, the CCA Oaks was a problem because there's no pace.
Oh.
Elate's race, I think they actually did run a little bit there, but it wasn't anything like blistering. I mean, I don't know who's gonna go. I don't know who's gonna cook that thing up.
And here's the segue to the next race. Let's just say someone from the sprint division wants to stretch out. Not like there was a whole lot of pace in the Grade 1 Ballerina. I mean, it was comical.
You know what? I'm not even 100% sure. I should have looked. It's almost like the Ballerina pace was about as fast as the personal ins.
We could take a look. We could absolutely take a look at that. I have the fractions here for the Ballerina. The actual were 24:05 and 47:81. I mean, that's nuts. And then let's take a quick look back one race. Sorry, we're having some little technical issues that are distracting me here. Hopefully what's going out live to the universe isn't distorted like it sounds like it is on the call to JK. Here the end said 24:14 and 47:91. So not going to get a lot of help in that regard. Even if some sprinters were to try to stretch out and contest a race like the Distaff. But, I mean, by the moon, very impressive performance. I mean, I suppose you could argue the race was handed to her on a silver platter. When you let the best closer have the lead through slow fractions, I mean, that's a very different situation, JK, than what you talk about sometimes of when you want a speed horse on the lead, you want them contesting reasonable fractions to keep the closers out of it. When you basically let the closer have the lead, you're just handing them a race on a silver platter, no?
No, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it's definitely not the way that I would go about it, but it happens.
What did you think of the races as a whole, the Ballerina?
I can't wait to bet on Karina Mia.
Really? You were impressed?
Yeah, I actually just looked at where she'll start next. I would imagine it'll either be 6.5 at Belmont in the what is it? The Gallant Bloom, or Chad sends a string down to Keeneland. It could be the TCOA. What's it called? The TCA, whatever, the strip. Yeah, Oaks or what, I don't know what they call it. It's a 6 furlong race. I'm hoping she runs in that one because the 6 is going to be a little bit sharp and she won't win. And then I can bet her back in the Breeders' Cup. She ran huge. And despite the track, right? I mean, whatever we find out about the track, we find out about the track. But they went so slow, and she was the only one that made a move, and she was running late. Losing ground, I thought she was super impressive.
Yeah, 3 wide throughout, right? I mean, definitely one to take out of it. What did you make of Highway Star?
I thought that Angel Arroyo did a great job putting her in the race. I thought that was really smart. I mean, I don't think she's good enough, but he rode her well and put her in the race and gave me a little bit of fear because I surely didn't have that horse on any ticket.
We'll talk about your tickets a little bit. Let's continue rolling through the races, though. The Allen Jerkins, I almost said King's Bishop again. The Allen Jerkins, boy, my biggest takeaway from this race is why don't we have future wagering, anti-post wagering on future stakes in this country the way they do in the UK? Because I think everybody we knew would have scored out here. Give me a quick rundown of your thoughts on the Allen Jerkins.
Well, I mean, this is one of those like beautiful moments of like everything kind of comes together, and you can kind of get that horse home you've been touting. I thought that for one, it's one of my favorite races of the year. I love that race. One of my favorite King's Bishops is Uncle Mo and Caleb's Posse. I thought that was a ton of fun. It's always a fun race, and so. It gives a lot of fun, exciting handicapping angle. I thought Practical Joke was brilliant. I thought that the ride was more brilliant. And
in what regard?
I mean, I designed the race of him doing exactly what he did, then tipping out at the top and winning. That's kind of Joel's trip. I mean, he didn't tuck in with Forever and Bridle, but that's kind of, he likes to be moving down the middle of the track. And that's what I thought he was going to do, but he stayed in there, went right up the inside and just mowed Talkaful down. I thought Talkaful ran huge. I think he deserves a little bit of credit for his performance. He ran really well. I heard Baffert talking a little bit about American Anthem. I think it's a really interesting aspect, a good training, handicapping angle. And Baffert's at the point in his career where he can admit when he made a mistake. And I really do appreciate that. He said that he messed up American Anthem because he was trying to stretch American Anthem out for the Haskell. So he trained him trying to stretch him out. And he said that he made a late change and an audible and decided to run him in the Kingsbury and the Allen Jerkins. And he said, admittedly, that he took away his fastball. And he said that he had no right to run third. He only ran third because he's a good horse.
That's
and I thought that was really interesting. So I thought Practical Joke was great. I don't know where they're going to go with him now. I mean, I guess he could win the dirt mile. It's 2 turns, but it's still a mile. Maybe it's not so much the one turn aspect of Practical Joke that makes him that helped him and moved him up there, but maybe it was just a shorter distance. He's been running so well at a mile and a 16th and a mile and an 1/8 and a mile and a quarter when everyone expected him not to, or at least I did. You got to give him a little bit of an upgrade for that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and not like he ran a bad race in the Haskell at all. The dirt mile seems like it could be in his sights, I would think. Let's pause on Talkable. You mentioned how impressive it was. Let me give you some numbers to back that up. Oh, Practical Joke, by the way, a 97 Beyer speed figure. Craig Murkowski of Timeform relatively had it a little bit faster with a final figure of 120 adjusted to 121 on their scale when you factored in the pace. Talkable's pace figures in this race, 165 and 141 for the first 2 calls. And what that led Craig to do in terms of his overall performance figure, the final speed figure raw, 118, got a full 10-point upgrade to 128, 7 clear of Practical Joke for the fractions. The amazing fractions Talkable cut out in that race. What's going to happen next with Talkable, do you think?
Oh, I mean, he's going to be tough in the Breeders' Cup Sprint going 6 if he finds his way there. Obviously, he's going to have to find another race, but get him in that race with Dre Fong, and they could really cook up some things going there, and maybe that does give Chad an idea of running Practical Joke going 6 instead of the dirt mile. I mean, 6 might be a little sharp for Practical Joke, but Talkable ran big. I love horses like that just that kind of throw it down and stay on. I didn't think that he would stay on the way that he did based on the fact that it's been well documented. He's a bit of a runoff. But going 6, you can't really run off going 6. You just let him roll.
You mentioned Dre Fong, and before you mentioned the idea of Baffert having a home court advantage when they come out to the West Coast. And I get what you mean in terms of East Coast horses not always showing their form out there. Notable exceptions, many, of course. But how about this, man? Baffert, at this point, he comes here, he wins all our stakes races on our biggest days. Does he think at some point about just moving here, for goodness sake? He wins everything anyway.
The purses are so good, and I think that if Chad's clients weren't out east and he took his horses out west, he'd win every turf race out there like Baffert wins all the dirt races out east. So, right. I don't know what it is, and I'd love to know what it is. I'd love for someone to give me the scientific reason or a trainer to explain to me why California dirt horses excel east and the vice versa isn't the case, and why it's that way for the East Coast turf horses doing so well out west. I don't. It doesn't make sense. Like, oh, the ones out east are just better, but is that really the case? I mean, maybe it is, or is it they run on a softer ground out east, and when they get to a firmer surface, that really moves them up, and the opposite when the West Coasters are on a firmer surface and they go out east, they're not fit enough. I don't know what it is.
Well, Dre Fong putting up a performance that looked very much the other bookend of the set to his King's Bishop last year. Just blew that field away. I know you used other horses in the race, JK. Afterwards, did you feel like you should have just kept it single and kept it simple and singled Dre Fong? How impressive was that effort to you? And reflect for a moment on the race.
Hindsight is 2020. You know, in the pick six, we ice cold singled practical joke. So I didn't. I mean, I can be pretty stinking aggressive, but I didn't want to be like that aggressive. I pressed him up quite a bit. Mind Your Biscuits has impressed me a lot. As much of a workout report snob that I am, I don't know how the heck I missed the whole Mind Your Biscuits working bad thing. Because it seemed like after the race, like everyone around me was like, "Oh, he was working so bad. Oh, you looked terrible. Oh, I completely missed that whole thing." So I used him a little bit, and then we used the Delacour, no dozing, and
Divining Rod, and it was the one. In
they like I can't remember which one was in which race. I get confused, but yeah. So the Delacour horse, and they were both the 4-horse, I believe. So even more confusing. Yeah, no, Dre Fong was amazing, and he got that unbelievably easy, lead. And I think one of the things that scared me a little bit about Dre Fong was when I was out at Del Mar a week ago, a horse by the name of Lord Simba ran, and he was like 3-5 for Baffert, and he had been working with Dre Fong, and I'm assuming that's why he was 3-5, and he ran absolutely awful. And I think maybe that in the back of my head might have influenced me a little bit on ice cold singling Dre Fong, and maybe the left turn that he took when he broke from the gate last time. But once they popped, and like seriously within 6 jumps he was like 4 or 5 clear, I kind of knew the race was over. And all those annoying people in the world that said stop the race were actually right.
Your favorite expression, stop the race. He ran a little bit early. I mean, pace figure wise, a 142 and a 130 coded neutral from Craig. He ends up with a 130 on the time form scale, and I'm reaching for the Beyer here. Ends up with a 107 Beyer speed figure, and certainly seems like a horse who's over whatever had ailed him in the past and going to be a major contender in the sprint division going forward, especially heading back out west.
If I was Bob Baffert, I was very concerned about what happens with Takaful. If he wins his next start and gets into the Breeders' Cup, he is a problem for Dre Fong.
Would you think would you want to see Dre Fong just drawn outside of him? What would make you feel better about Dre Fong if you're anticipating the Dre Fong Takaful showdown in the Breeders' Cup?
Well, if Dre Fong and Takaful are in the race, then I'll probably have to stop. I don't know where the Chase Bank is in Del Mar. I'll probably have to stop by one and get some money out to bet on Ransom the Moon if he shows up in that spot, because I think he'll be dangerous out there on the West Coast closing into those fractions.
There's another future bet idea from JK. One other point I'll make, I mean, I know the workout report, might have told this time on Mind Your Biscuits, but I will say this in general. I'm always scared to take too seriously when I hear negative workout information about sprinters. Because I swear 3 of the last 4 years, the horse that won the Breeders' Cup Sprint was supposedly not working well into the race. I think the sprint game is just so hard, and these horses are so tough. And in their training, they don't work like monstrously the way that route horses do for whatever reason. And it's not an angle I'm willing to go to the mat with. You hear stories about Kona Gold and how poorly he worked back in the day. And there were stories about Work All Week not working well. There were stories about both Run Happy and his rival, spacing
Private Zone.
Private Zone, sorry. Those 2 horses both not working well. They run 1-2. So I'm just throwing that out there for the listeners as an idea. Don't necessarily get too hung up on that. And you love the workout reports. Is that something you've ever you noticed what I'm talking about, or do you think it's a coincidence?
No, we talked about it before. I haven't noticed it as much. And I will now. I'll start to look at it more. I've gotten better about the turf horses working on dirt. I don't let that get me off.
Right. That's another one that another potential, as great as that workout information is. And it's amazing. You get that DRF workout report every day, and how often it is that the horses with the B pluses are the ones in the exacta. It's kind of amazing.
And just an aside while we're talking about it.
Yeah, please.
And there's only a week left, so we probably should have talked about it earlier, but excuse me. In the DRF workout report and at Saratoga, it's different from most other places because a lot of the horses get to work on the turf. Even the babies get to work on the turf. So when you're looking at that report, you got to look for the letters FM for firm to see. And obviously, if it's good, you might want to look down in your form too. But double check where those horses are working, because I mean, it happened yesterday. That Treasure Beach horse in the last, that work two back was on the turf, and it was a nice work on the turf. And you got to look for that when you're playing at a place like Saratoga. Del Mar, they don't let them on the grass as much, I don't think so. But anyways, that was just an aside.
Saratoga, referring about 20-1 winner of the last, pointed out by the DRF workout report. Let's move on to the sword dancer. We're going to tie this in with a question from a listener. I didn't think we were going to get to this today, but it's really the perfect time. This is a fellow who is tired of people, including myself, talking about the inherent class advantage of European turf runners. And he cited this year's Arlington Million. He cited the sword dancer. He cited Tepin going over to Royal Ascot and kicking everybody's butt last year. And he said, like, is this just an overblown thing, this supposed class advantage of European horses? Like, what's going on here? Proud American question. I have my thoughts on it, JK, but I'll let you start.
Well, I think the Tepin thing was circumstantial. Forgive me if I'm I don't even know who it is, so this is kind of a bad point, but I'm just gonna go out on a limb. Whoever the race she ran in last year, what was it, the St. James?
No, Queen Anne.
Queen Anne. The winner of the Queen Anne was the Godolphin this year, right?
You broke up there for a second. Say that again.
The winner of the Queen Anne this year was that Godolphin horse?
Ribchester.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ribchester would have smacked her one this year. No.
It's hard to say. She was in such good form then, but I mean, Ribchester is a serious horse.
I think we have special horses that go over there. Just like, I mean, we out of 100 horses, we have one that's really good. Out of 100 horses, they've got 8 that are really good. I just think that, if they had dirt tracks, we would go over there and we would smack them up in every dirt race. They just don't have dirt tracks, and if they did, I don't even know if their purses would be big enough for us to participate in those dirt races. So I do think that there's something to that. It's like to me, it's like them sending their best rugby player over to play in the Super Bowl. It's or actually the other way around. That was actually a bad analogy. Just to scrap that one.
I kind of like where you were going with it, but if you want to start again, go for it. I think you're onto something with it, but I think you said it backwards.
Yeah, it'd be like them bringing like one of their like English Premier League soccer players over to play in our MLS. It's not that we don't have an MLS player that can go play over there. We have an MLS player that can go over there and play, can be competitive. But they've got 27 guys that can come over here and be the best. And I think that that's probably the best comparison. Whew, I blew that first one.
You got it back, though. You got it back. I think a lot of it's circumstantial. I mean, I guess circumstantial is the word of this edition of DRF Players Podcast. I didn't say before. Show 264, August 29th edition, by the way. We'll slide that in there. But circumstantial is the word for it. And let's talk about the circumstances in the sword dancer. Ryan Moore, one of the best jockeys in the world, probably not a ride he's going to recall when his storied career is over, reflecting back on all the fine work he's done. Fair to say? Yeah, no,
I thought those two horses were the most likely winner. At a couple of stages, they looked that way. I mean, especially Erupt. I thought when Erupt made that little run up the inside, I was completely against money multiplier. I actually was obsessing with it because things were going well, and I kept being like, God, I can't believe this horse is favored. I'm like looking back at the form, and I'm like kind of panicking. Speaking of money multiplier, I don't know if you've seen it, Pete. I think you might have, and if you haven't, I don't even know how you find it. There's a little video of Chad rooting money multiplier, and it's absolutely hilarious. Have you seen it?
No, you got to find it and send it out on the Twitter.
Oh no, I don't know if I'm going to tweet it. if you just
that tells me a lot. What you just said tells me a lot.
If you DM me, I'll send it to you. But essentially, he's like having a temper tantrum watching it. He's like, don't. You can read his lips. He's saying, "Don't hang on me. Don't hang on me. Don't hang on me." And then he goes, "Expletive. The 3 got me." And then you can see him like kind of scanning, like, and then he sees that the camera's on him, and you can see this ultimate like mode of embarrassment. It's the best.
Funny.
So funny.
That is very funny.
I thought Sadler's Joy ran huge. I thought I was beat. I thought Money Multiplier was going to win. I thought that Maker's Horse, Bigger Picture, was going to win. The 2 Euros were going backwards, and that angle at Saratoga is so tough because it's like they're running right at you. You're so low that you just can't really see the runs like you can at places that films from a higher angle. And Sadler's Joy just leveled off and got up.
I mean, perfect setup, perfect trip this time. Incredible timing by Leparoux. I think a couple of things happened here. The horse has a good 3/8 run, and that he was ridden to produce a great 3/8 run, and he got an amazing setup with Ryan Moore's Suicide Mission on the front end. Time for him having the mile and 1 1/4 fractions graded red to indicate that fast pace, and then just the perfect setup. And a lot of times you'll see those 3/8 run type horses. They need the perfect setup. Sadler's Joy got it and got up and put us. And we'll save our discussion of the Boston Spa, JK, because we've now been through the first 5 races of the Pick 6, and this was a big group effort. There were a lot of people involved, a lot of my friends who are, part-time race trackers or even twice a year race trackers. JK generously letting everybody in on the action. And then through 5 races, sitting 5 of 5 on the Pick 6. We'll talk a little bit about ticket construction later. But why don't you talk through how and what you were feeling sitting 5 of 5 heading into the Boston Spa?
It was exciting. I was, excuse me, wearing out. In fact, I keep doing the clearing the throat because we screamed so much on Saturday. I asked our friends Nick Tamero and Travis Stone, who are much better at math than I am. If Eric Bialik was there, I would have asked him. When we're 4 to 5 and 8 to 5, what's our mathematical what's the odds, say, our mathematical probability that either Lady Eli or Antono win? And the consensus was anywhere between like 80 and 92%. Then someone said, well, what about takeout? And it got confusing. So I felt good. I felt good about that. The trickiest part about it was Antono was clearly a better score, but our good friends, Pipes, who was on the show on Friday, Chris Pipito, and Doogie were alive to Lady Eli only. So, the celebration was better with Lady Eli. Tales from the Track. Chris left. He had some bad beats on the day. He left to go to his Lucky TV in the grandstand to watch the race. And so we hit it, and we're all celebrating, high-fiving, carrying on, boom, 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 boom. Everyone's having a great time. Boozy milkshakes are about to be ordered, and we realized that the Pipes is nowhere to be found. And so they're like, oh, he went to the grandstand to watch the TV. So we're standing up on the balcony waiting for him to turn the corner so we can cheer him home. And he turns the corner, and he looks up, and I'm telling you, he's on the other side of the path. Like, he just came out of like where you get your hand stamped, and he looks up and he sees us directly. We start going nuts. He's going nuts. People around him are looking at him like, what the heck's going on with this guy? He's screaming. And he comes up, and it was a ton of fun. It's always a lot more fun when other people can be involved in those situations. It's fun to win by yourself, but it's absolutely amazing to win with other people.
I learned something about myself, and I think the lesson is I'm not quite as sick as I thought. Jonathan brilliantly constructed these tickets. We don't need to get into the specifics of the numbers, but each Pick 6 combination had multiple multiple times. So everybody really had a good amount at stake. And it was twice as much to Antono as it was to Lady Eli. And I found myself sitting down to watch that race, and not like I would have been upset had Antono won, but rooting hard in my heart for Lady Eli. The idea that it's so rare, you hang out with these people every day, you share your bad beat stories, the ups and the downs, all the vicissitudes of gambling, and there have been plenty of them for our group this summer. And to just have that rare opportunity. I mean, I can't even remember the last time when it felt like, we had 30 people in our spot or whatever, and it felt like everybody was going to win if Lady Eli won. And it probably didn't hurt that the filly in question was Lady Eli, one of the great racing stories of the last several years. And I was very pleased. I was very pleased with my route in the stretch for Lady Eli. You remember what I said, JK?
Oh, no, I don't remember.
I was just hollering, "Go on, champion! Go on, champion!" And
I do remember now. It's a little bit of a fog, if you know what I mean, but I do remember that.
To have her get us to the line, and to have everybody be able to win together was special.
I from a race perspective, I watched the replay again the other day. I mean, Irad rode her so confident.
Yep.
He was just, with the stick down, right-handed shoulder tapping her, and that was it. He never even felt like he needed to reach back. And I've been around a couple of jockeys lately, and they say spank them, and I've heard it coast to coast, and it's a cultural thing too. I've heard the Hispanic Spanish jockeys say spank, and I heard Quintus Normo say spank. So it's like I'm gonna start saying now. I'm gonna start saying spank. But he didn't even have to reach back. I just thought it was a ultimate display of class. And how good is she? And obviously we're talking about this fun kind of sentimental moment, but let's bring it back to the racing analysis part of it. I mean, what race is she going to run in the Breeders' Cup? I mean, are they going to run her in the mile and what is it 3/8 out there, or are they going to try to run her in the mile? Because it feels like at the miles she's really good. I know there's a mile and 16th, but at that shorter distance, I think that she's with that turn of foot. I don't know.
Oh, that's an interesting idea and something that I'm sure they'll be considering. We'll check the stories on DRF.com to see if there's been any indication of what might come next for Lady Eli. But it was a sentimental moment, and I will say this though, JK, as good as my route was for Lady Eli, I think my route about 7 hours later was bad when we were watching the fight, and I was cheering in 1-9 Floyd Mayweather like it was my first rodeo. So I kind of undid some of the rooting good I'd done earlier in the day. But these things happen.
I have a quote for you. Let me see if I can find it. I don't want to misquote it. I don't want to misquote it. Let me see if I can dig it up here. I don't want to paraphrase it. Nick Tamaro says, "You should let Pete know that if he was cheering this loud for a 1-5 shot at the track, we'd torture him."
I deserve to be tortured even for a boxing match. It was a long day, folks. I've taken my medicine. We all let's not judge us. Let us not be judged by our worst routes in horse racing. Can we agree on that? We've all had bad ones.
Yeah, no, I had a good one the other day when that Finger Lakes horse that I singled came. I said, "Finger Lakes."
Not too bad. Let us know on Twitter, folks, some of your favorite routes when it comes to watching racing, whether it's Saratoga or anywhere else across the nation. Find Jonathan at UT Big Hair. Find me at Looms Boldly. I feel like we've wrapped Travers Day pretty well, all in all. Any other observations you had, notes you had, you wanted to share before we maybe squeeze in a couple of little notes here at the end of the show?
Yeah, no, I think that we talked about Irad's ride on Lady Eli. I think we'll probably transition to the ride discussion. I think that there's some interesting things that have happened over the last couple of days.
Where do you want to start?
I guess let's start out west with
let's do Nero.
Yeah, with Nero. I'll tell you my opinion first. I'll get your opinion, and then we'll talk about some of the subsequent things we've heard since then. Yes, I do believe that the horse kind of pulled himself up when he got the lead. If you don't know what we're talking about, Nero was I think $1 million plus horse for Coolmore, Pioneer of the Nile, A- workouts, 1-9, Baffert, first time starter, all of that.
Got a famous sibling, doesn't he?
I don't know. Does he? Oh, Ocean Knight. No, I don't know. Who is this? Who is the sibling?
Maybe I'm wrong. Rather than embarrass myself, let me just look it up.
Okay, I'll look. I'll tell the story while you do that. He breaks from the rail. Martine is riding, kind of rushes him up. Obviously, Martine works a lot of Baffert's horses. Kind of rushes him up. He gets the lead easy. Ends up kind of opening up, and then he does that thing that makes me want to pull my hair out, and I don't have very much of it, where he is looking around like he's going to win by 20, never really engages the horse or sets him down. And I mean, at the 16th pole was the first time he even threw a cross at the horse, and shook the reins at him, and then the horse kind of pulled him up, and then he starts riding vigorously, and Kit DeSormo meanwhile is flying on the 12 horse with a ton of momentum. Nero re-engages and gallops out in front, but gets beat. And so my opinion is that yes, the horse pulled himself up, but he pulled himself up because the 110-pound guy on top of him was not encouraging this 2-year-old first-time starter to continue running. And then asks him after another horse comes to his throat latch with a full head of steam. I thought it was a brutal ride, and I find there to be zero excuses made for Martine.
My thought that I was going to send upon watching the races, you've used the phrase several times in the podcast in the last month, JK, a jockey, talking about a jockey jacking around. And I thought if you ever needed a dictionary definition of jacking around, you might point to that ride. That said, there have been some impassioned defenses. We might as well, I'm just to play devil's advocate against yourself. Like, have you heard anything compelling about what else might have been going on in that situation?
That he was green, that he had needed blinkers, and that he pulled himself up. He was green because he wasn't being asked, and he pulled himself up because he wasn't being asked.
Isn't this also a perfect example of something I've heard both Mike Maloney and Paul Matisse talk about too, about how it's much harder to get the old trying to go from 0 to 60 on a horse analogy in a second, where you go from the confident handling right to seriously under pressure without sort of going through the gears and allowing a horse to accelerate properly. Did you think it was an example of that also?
I mean, not to disagree, not so much in this situation, because that's more the top of the stretch. You're holding. They come to you, you're asking. This is a situation where if he just rides the horse from the 8th pole, I think the horse wins. But the horse kind of shut off. And especially and I think a lot of people miss this, in a lot of works, especially works from the gate, they don't always finish their work at the wire.
Right.
So these horses aren't really fully aware of where the wire is. I know we as race watchers and the camera knows where the wire is, but he probably thought his job was done because Martine's just sitting there like he's, I call it the Uncle Mo ride. You can't do that. You especially with a 2-year-old, you got to engage the horse a little bit. I'm not saying you need to spank him, but shake the reins at him and let's involve him, and then look back at right outside the 16th pole. And if no one's coming, then you can do the showboat thing where you turn the stick back upside down and wag your finger. You know what I mean? But doing it at that point and show him the stick, teach him something. The horse, and then here's the other thing. I listened, and everyone else, I invite you to do this because everyone knows Pete and I are huge fans of Steve Bick, so it's not like we always want you to listen to that show. Listen to Bick's interview with Baffert yesterday, and you tell me what Baffert thinks about it. Because he didn't come out and say Martine screwed up, but you know how when you come home and you forgot to do something your wife asked you to do, or I know we have some ladies listening, and maybe the other way around as well. And they didn't tell you screwed up, but damn well you screwed up. It's exactly what happened in the interview.
It's called reading between the lines. Can we do the significant form ERAD DQ in 90 seconds, or do we put a pin in it?
Well, we'll talk about it on Friday. I don't think we have enough time. Okay. I don't know if anyone saw the Twitter battle between Richie Magliore and Jeremiah Englehart. Richie was passionate that what IRAD did in the last race on Sunday with a future stakes winner, in my opinion, in the chat name Pete.
Significant
form, who almost fell down and won for absolute fun. Richie believes that it was an intentional move, that he steered the horse down there. Jeremiah believes that it was more of a stumble. I'm not 100% sure. I've actually asked Jake to ask Angel what he thinks, because I've never sat on a horse before. So what do I know?
I saw that photo in Puerto Vallarta, though. I know that that's not exactly true.
That's not exactly true. I'm being a little bit modest and humble.
All right, we'll put a pin in it, though. We'll resume. If you haven't seen it, watch it. We'll talk about it more on Friday. Have to say, to this point, the most difficult thing that ever happened to me during a DRF Players podcast was Tommy Massis finding me at Keeneland and goosing me from behind while I was speaking. That has now been superseded by the ice cream man walking into the little house on the east side, Muggs, the handicapping Labrador, out for a walk. That's why you didn't hear the barking, and dropping his pants and mooning me in the middle of the show to attempt to get a reaction out of me. I'm proud to say it did not work. All right, that's it. That's all the time we have. I want to thank Jonathan Kitchen. I want to thank producer Craig, especially for getting the iTunes auto download mess fixed. We're working on the other download issues that some of you have been having. We're going to be back on Friday to look ahead to a fun Labor Days racing. I'm sorry again for my Mayweather route. If I got beer on you, send me the dry cleaning bills. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatel. May you win all your photos.